Imagine for a moment that you could learn anything, math, music, a language, or a skill, faster than you ever thought possible. Not by memorizing, not by cramming, but by truly understanding. Today, I want to share the secret technique that makes this possible. The first step is simple but powerful. Teach it to yourself as if you're explaining it to a child. Sounds funny, doesn't it? But here's why it works. When you try to explain something in simple words, you expose the gaps in your understanding. If you can't explain it simply, you probably don't understand it yet. It's like trying to assemble a machine without knowing what each piece does. Everything feels confusing until you really see how it fits. Next, don't just memorize facts. Play with them. Ask what-if questions. Challenge assumptions. Twist the problem around. Break it into tiny parts. If you're learning physics, imagine how the world would behave if gravity were twice as strong. If you're learning a language, create your own sentences and silly stories. Real understanding comes from interacting with knowledge, not just staring at it. The third step is repetition, but the right kind. Not mindless repetition, but testing yourself, explaining the concept again and again, differently each time. Each repetition strengthens your mental connections, like building bridges in your brain. And the more you struggle, the better. Struggle is not failure. It's the fuel for deep learning. Here's the fourth secret. Curiosity beats discipline. You don't have to force yourself if you can find something that sparks your interest. Dive into what fascinates you. Follow the thread of questions, and the learning happens almost effortlessly. If you're puzzled, lean into it. The world is full of mysteries, and every question you chase strengthens your mind. Finally, simplify everything. Complexity is seductive, but real mastery comes when you strip away unnecessary details and see the essence. If you can describe a concept in the simplest terms without losing accuracy, you've cracked it. Then you can build complexity back up, but now it makes sense. So the secret technique is really just a combination of curiosity, simplicity, exploration, and explanation. Teach it, test it, twist it, and simplify it. You'll find that learning anything becomes not just faster, but also joyful. And when you truly understand something, it sticks with you. Not just for a test, but for life. Remember, knowledge isn't a treasure locked in a chest. It's a puzzle waiting for your mind to explore. Approach it with playfulness, with curiosity, and with a relentless desire to understand, and there is nothing you cannot learn. The first step to learning anything quickly is deceptively simple. Explain it as if you're teaching it to someone else, or even better, as if you're teaching it to a child. It sounds almost too basic, almost silly, but it is one of the most powerful tools for understanding anything deeply. When you take the time to articulate an idea in plain, simple words, you force your brain to confront the areas where your knowledge is weak. It's easy to think you understand something when you can repeat jargon or memorize definitions. But true understanding is not about repeating words. It's about making sense of how those words connect to the real world. Imagine trying to explain a concept like electricity to a curious 10-year-old. You can't hide behind formulas or fancy terms. You have to strip it down to its essence. Electricity is the movement of tiny particles called electrons, like water flowing through a pipe, making things work. Suddenly, you realize what you do and don't understand. You might find that you can describe the flow of electrons, but not how a battery actually produces energy. This exercise exposes gaps you weren't even aware of. In other words, simplifying forces clarity. It's like holding a magnifying glass over your own mind, showing every tiny crack and blind spot. Explaining concepts in your own words also strengthens memory. When you put information into your own language, your brain has to process it actively rather than just storing it passively. This active processing creates connections between ideas, building a network of understanding instead of isolated facts. It's the difference between knowing a sentence by heart and truly grasping its meaning. You may remember the words of a textbook, but if you can explain it to someone else in your own terms, that knowledge becomes flexible, usable, and resilient. But this isn't just about talking out loud. Writing it down works just as well. Take a blank piece of paper and pretend you are teaching a class. Start from the basics, avoid complex terms, and aim to make every step crystal clear. If you stumble or can't explain something, that's a signal to study it further. Every point of confusion is actually an opportunity. Each gap you find is a doorway to deeper understanding. The key is to be honest with yourself. Pretending to understand without probing these gaps only slows your learning. Another important part of this technique is iterative improvement. Your first explanation might be clumsy or incomplete. That's perfectly fine. Go back, study the topic, and try again. Each time you attempt to explain it, your understanding grows. Concepts that seemed complicated at first suddenly become intuitive because you've built mental scaffolding that organizes the information logically. This is why people who truly understand something can explain it clearly, while those who rely solely on memorization often struggle to teach it. Finally, this approach changes the way you think about learning itself. It transforms it from a passive activity, reading, listening, or memorizing, into an active one. You're no longer a spectator of knowledge. You're an explorer, uncovering the structure of ideas, connecting the dots, and discovering patterns. And when you learn this way, learning becomes not only faster, but also far more enjoyable. Understanding something deeply gives you confidence, insight, and the freedom to apply knowledge creatively in new situations. In short, the secret is simple but profound. Teach what you want to learn. By breaking down ideas, explaining them in plain language, and honestly confronting what you don't know, you turn the act of learning into a process of discovery. Knowledge stops being abstract and becomes something tangible you can manipulate, use, and build upon. This is how you learn anything fast, and how you make understanding stick for life. Learning isn't just about memorizing facts or repeating formulas. It's about interacting with knowledge in a way that makes it your own. When you approach a subject passively, like reading a textbook or watching a lecture without questioning it, your brain doesn't really grasp it. You might remember a few words or symbols, but that understanding is fragile. To learn something quickly and deeply, you need to engage with it actively, to twist it, test it, and explore it from every angle. Think of knowledge like clay. If you don't touch it, shape it, and play with it, it remains just a lump. But if you mold it, it becomes something you can work with, use, and remember forever. One of the most effective ways to interact with knowledge is to ask questions relentlessly. Don't just accept information at face value. Wonder why it works, how it connects to other ideas, and what would happen if something changed. For instance, if you're learning a scientific principle, don't stop at "this is how it works." Ask yourself, why does it work this way? What would happen if conditions were different? Can I think of a real-world example? These questions force your brain to build links between facts, creating a deeper understanding that's far more durable than rote memorization. Curiosity is the fuel. Questions are the engine. Another powerful technique is breaking concepts into smaller, manageable pieces. Big ideas can feel overwhelming, and the mind tends to freeze when faced with complexity. But if you divide a problem into parts and understand each piece individually, the entire system becomes clear. For example, if you're learning a language, don't try to memorize an entire grammar book at once. Focus on a single rule, a handful of words, and practice using them. Slowly, piece by piece, the larger structure begins to make sense. The act of breaking things down forces your brain to see patterns and relationships that are invisible when everything is crammed together. Playfulness is essential in this process. Interacting with knowledge isn't a chore, it's an experiment. Treat every problem like a puzzle, every principle like a mystery waiting to be solved. If you're learning math, create your own variations of problems. If you're studying history, imagine yourself in the past and think about how people made decisions. This kind of active engagement transforms learning from a passive activity into an adventure. Your brain starts to enjoy the process, which paradoxically makes learning faster and more effective. Importantly, interacting with knowledge requires making mistakes and learning from them. When you experiment, you're going to stumble, and that's not just okay, it's invaluable. Every error highlights a misunderstanding. Every confusion points you toward the exact area that needs attention. Instead of fearing mistakes, embrace them as signposts on your path to mastery. Knowledge isn't a straight line. It's a winding road with detours that teach you more than smooth travel ever could. Finally, interacting with knowledge means applying it creatively. Don't just stop at understanding a principle. Use it. Solve problems, build projects, teach someone else, or connect it to something entirely different. Knowledge that stays dormant in your mind isn't truly learned. Only when it is applied does it become alive. This is what separates fast learners from slow learners. Those who manipulate, question, and experiment with ideas retain them and understand them deeply. In short, to learn anything fast, you have to go beyond memorization and passive absorption. Ask questions, break ideas into pieces, experiment playfully, embrace mistakes, and apply what you learn. Knowledge is not something to be consumed. It's something to be explored. The more you interact with it, the faster it becomes part of your thinking, and the more powerful your mind becomes. Learning this way isn't just faster, it's richer, more enjoyable, and unforgettable. Repetition is often misunderstood. Many people think that learning quickly is about going over the same material mindlessly, reading it multiple times, or listening to a lecture again and again. But the truth is, repetition works best when it is active, varied, and deliberate. It's not about the quantity of repetitions, but the quality. The goal is to strengthen the connections in your brain, to transform information from something you've seen into something you truly understand and can use. The most effective type of repetition involves testing yourself and explaining concepts in different ways. Simply rereading a textbook might make you feel familiar with the material, but familiarity is not understanding. Instead, close the book and try to recall the concept in your own words. Write it down, say it out loud, or teach it to an imaginary student. Then approach it from a different angle. Use an analogy, draw a diagram, or connect it to something completely unrelated. Each iteration forces your brain to reorganize the information, making the memory stronger and more flexible. Struggle is an essential part of this process. It may seem counterintuitive, but the moments when you're unsure or confused are actually the most valuable for learning. If recalling a fact or solving a problem requires effort, that effort signals to your brain that this information is worth retaining. The mental challenge strengthens the neural pathways, like exercising a muscle. Learning isn't supposed to be effortless. Real understanding emerges from engaging deeply, wrestling with ideas, and sometimes failing before finally succeeding. Another crucial aspect of repetition is spacing it out over time. Cramming information in one sitting may help for short-term recall, like passing a test, but it rarely leads to lasting understanding. Instead, revisit the material periodically, allowing your brain time to forget and then recall it. This spaced repetition strengthens long-term retention because your mind has to actively reconstruct the knowledge each time, rather than relying on short-term memory. Each recall is like refreshing a bridge that connects your thoughts, making it sturdier and more reliable. Variation is equally important. If you repeat the same problem or example over and over, your brain becomes good at that specific scenario, but may struggle to apply the knowledge in a new context. To truly learn fast, approach the concept from multiple directions. Change the variables, combine it with other ideas, or explain it using a different analogy. This flexibility ensures that your understanding is not rigid, but adaptable, capable of solving a wide range of problems, not just the ones you've seen before. The process of repetition also helps in internalizing patterns and principles, not just facts. By revisiting concepts in different ways, you begin to see the underlying structure behind them. You notice connections that weren't obvious at first. You understand why things work the way they do, and you develop the intuition that makes advanced concepts easier to grasp. This is what transforms knowledge from a list of memorized points into a living, usable understanding. Finally, repetition is not just abo, UT technique. It's about mindset. Approach each iteration with curiosity and engagement, not as a chore. Celebrate the small victories when a concept clicks after several attempts. Value the struggle, the mistakes, and the moments of confusion because they indicate growth. When done correctly, repetition becomes a tool not only for speed but for depth turning fleeting memory into lasting mastery. In short, the secret is not to repeat blindly, but to repeat thoughtfully, test actively, very deliberately, and embrace the struggle. Each repetition is an opportunity to strengthen, connect, and deepen your understanding. The more intentionally you repeat and engage with material, the faster and more permanently you learn. Learning becomes less about memorizing facts and more about building a mental framework that can be used creatively and effectively in any situation. One of the most powerful forces in learning anything quickly is curiosity. Discipline is useful, no doubt, but it can only take you so far. When you rely solely on discipline, forcing yourself to sit down and study or memorize something, you working against your natural mental energy, it becomes tedious, slow, and often unsustainable. Curiosity, on the other hand, fuels learning effortlessly. When you are genuinely curious about a topic, your mind engages naturally, absorbs information quickly, and connects ideas in ways that discipline alone rarely achieves. Curiosity begins with questions, real questions, not just what do I need to memorize, the kinds of questions that make you lean in, scratch your head, and explore. Why does this happen? How does it work? What if it were different? These questions activate your brain in a completely different way. Suddenly, learning is no longer a task or obligation. It becomes a detective game. You're chasing mysteries, and your brain rewards exploration with understanding. The more you follow your curiosity, the faster learning happens, because your mind wants to solve these puzzles. Another critical aspect is personal relevance. Curiosity is strongest when you see a reason to care about what you're learning. This doesn't mean the subject has to be immediately practical or useful. Sometimes it's enough that it fascinates you, or that it sparks a what-if scenario in your imagination. For example, understanding the physics of a roller coaster may seem unrelated to daily life, but if you allow yourself to wonder how it works, what forces are at play, and why it's safe, your brain naturally absorbs the principles involved. When you are invested in the why or how, the learning sticks far longer. Curiosity also encourages deep exploration, which leads to insight. When you follow your own questions rather than someone else's curriculum, you dig deeper into a subject. You connect seemingly unrelated ideas, discover hidden patterns, and see principles that textbooks might never highlight. This type of exploration allows your mind to construct its own understanding, not just accept what someone else tells you. Learning becomes less about memorization and more about building your own mental framework, a framework that is flexible, adaptable, and remarkably resilient. Equally important is the joy of discovery. When curiosity drives learning, you experience small bursts of excitement each time something clicks. These moments are far more remotivating than external rewards like grades or praise. The brain releases dopamine when it solves a puzzle or uncovers something new, which strengthens memory and reinforces the desire to keep exploring. In other words, curiosity doesn't just make learning faster. It makes it enjoyable and self-sustaining. Curiosity also changes the way you approach mistakes. When you're driven by interest rather than obligation, errors are no longer failures, they're experiments. Each mistake is a clue. Each confusion a doorway to a new understanding. You're not worried about looking foolish or getting it wrong. Instead, you lean into the problem, asking more questions, testing ideas, and discovering insights. This mindset dramatically accelerates learning because the fear of failure, which often slows progress, is replaced with excitement and engagement. Finally, curiosity encourages lifelong learning. When you learn because you are genuinely fascinated, knowledge becomes a habit, not a task. You start to see the world as a network of questions waiting to be explored, rather than a series of obligations to fulfill. This mindset allows you to learn anything, anytime, without needing a formal structure or curriculum. Curiosity transforms the process from slow, mechanical effort into rapid, joyful discovery. In short, curiosity beats discipline when it comes to learning anything fast. It fuels engagement, accelerates understanding, transforms mistakes into lessons, and makes knowledge stick for life. When you let questions, fascination, and wonder guide your mind, learning becomes effortless, natural, and remarkably powerful. The secret is to chase what fascinates you, lean into puzzles, and allow your brain to explore freely, because nothing teaches faster or more deeply than genuine curiosity. One of the most overlooked secrets to learning anything quickly is simplification. Complexity can be intimidating. When a subject seems overwhelming, it's natural to freeze, memorize superficially, or give up entirely. But the truth is that the faster you want to learn, the more you need to strip ideas down to their essence. Simplifying doesn't mean dumbing down. It means uncovering the core principles that make everything else make sense. Once you understand the fundamental building blocks, complexity becomes manageable, even exciting. The first step in simplification is to identify the core idea. Every subject, no matter how complicated it seems, has underlying principles that hold everything together. Physics, mathematics, language, music, even social sciences. They all have patterns, rules, or structures that form the backbone of understanding. Your task is to find these key threads. Ask yourself, what is the central concept here? What is really happening beneath the surface? Focusing on the essence allows you to navigate complexity with clarity, instead of getting lost in endless details. Simplification also involves removing unnecessary jargon and overcomplicated explanations. Many fields are filled with technical terms and convoluted descriptions which often hide rather than reveal understanding. To truly learn something, translate it into your own words. Imagine explaining the concept to someone who has no prior knowledge. Can you make it clear without relying on complicated language? If you can, you've hit the heart of the matter. If not, you need to go deeper until it clicks. Another aspect of simplification is breaking problems into smaller, digestible parts. When faced with a complex problem, try to reduce it to fundamental steps or smaller questions. Understand each part individually, then see how they connect. For example, if you're learning calculus, you don't start by memorizing entire formulas. Instead, focus on understanding what a derivative represents, how limits work, and how simple functions behave. Once you grasp the small pieces, the bigger picture falls naturally into place. Simplifying also allows for faster recall and application. When you understand the essence of an idea, you don't have to rely on rote memory or complicated reference materials. You can reconstruct the knowledge whenever needed because you know the underlying logic. This makes learning faster and more flexible. Complexity fades into clarity because you're no longer memorizing every detail. You're understanding the framework that holds those details together. The process of simplification encourages creative thinking as well. Once you understand the core, you can play with variations, combine concepts in new ways, and apply your knowledge to unexpected situations. You're no longer constrained by rigid rules or overwhelming detail. You're free to experiment, innovate, and adapt. This is what transforms learning from slow absorption into rapid mastery. Finally, simplification reinforces confidence and reduces mental fatigue. When a topic feels approachable and structured, you're more willing to engage with it, ask questions, and explore. Complexity often paralyzes, but clarity motivates. By focusing on the essentials, you conserve mental energy for the creative and exploratory aspects of learning, which are the parts that truly accelerate understanding. In short, simplification is not about ignoring complexity. It's about finding the heart of it and building from there. Strip away unnecessary detail, uncover the core principles, explain them in simple terms, and break the subject into manageable pieces. Once you do this, learning becomes faster, retention becomes stronger, and applying knowledge becomes natural. Complexity becomes a playground instead of a prison. When you master simplification, you give yourself the ability to tackle any subject with confidence, clarity, and speed. The final key to learning anything quickly is to treat knowledge like play. Too often, learning is approached as a chore, something to be endured, forced, or completed to meet an external goal. But when you shift your mindset from obligation to exploration, everything changes. Playfulness activates the brain in a way that makes learning faster, deeper, and far more enjoyable. It transforms concepts from abstract rules into puzzles and experiments that you want to solve. And when you enjoy the process, your mind absorbs knowledge naturally. Learning as play starts with experimentation. Don't be afraid to try ideas in your own way. Test hypotheses and take risks. If you're learning a new skill, experiment with different approaches instead of following a rigid formula. If you're studying science, imagine different scenarios and mentally simulate outcomes. If you're learning a language, invent funny sentences or conversations. Playful experimentation allows your mind to interact with knowledge actively, discovering patterns and connections that passive study rarely reveals. Another aspect of learning as play is curiosity-driven exploration. Play naturally emerges when you are free to explore without judgment or pressure. You follow your questions wherever they lead, and in doing so, you uncover insights that textbooks or formal instruction might never show. When you approach learning like a game, each challenge becomes an opportunity, each question a puzzle, and each mistake a clue rather than a failure. Your brain begins to enjoy the process, which dramatically accelerates retention and understanding. Playfulness also encourages creativity and innovation. When you treat knowledge as a toy, you are free to combine ideas in novel ways. You start seeing connections between subjects that others overlook. For example, you might link physics to music or history to psychology, finding patterns that make both more comprehensible. Playful exploration trains your brain to think flexibly, solve problems in new ways, and approach challenges with curiosity rather than fear. This is one of the fastest routes to mastery because understanding becomes intuitive and adaptable. Embracing play also changes your relationship with mistakes. When you play, errors are part of the fun. They're opportunities to adjust, learn, and try again. Fear of failure is replaced with curiosity and engagement. This mindset accelerates learning because you are willing to test boundaries, explore difficult concepts, and persist through confusion. Struggle becomes enjoyable, not stressful, and learning becomes a continuous cycle of trial, error, and discovery. Another powerful element of learning as play is internal motivation. When you enjoy exploring a subject, you don't need external rewards or pressure to keep going. You return to the material naturally, driven by fascination and the desire to see how far you can take it. This intrinsic motivation is far more effective than discipline alone because it sustains learning over the long term. Fast learning isn't just about speed. It's about creating a process that you can maintain and grow with indefinitely. Finally, play makes knowledge stick. When you engage with material in a playful, curious, and interactive way, your brain forms rich associations and mental connections. Concepts are no longer isolated facts to memorize. They become living ideas that you can recall, apply, and manipulate effortlessly. Play allows learning to feel like an adventure rather than a task, and when the mind is fully engaged, speed, depth, and retention increase dramatically. In short, the secret of learning anything fast is to approach knowledge with a playful, experimental mindset. Treat mistakes as experiments. Follow your curiosity, combine ideas creatively, and immerse yourself in the joy of discovery. When you turn learning into play, it becomes effortless, memorable, and endlessly rewarding. This final principle ties together all the others: curiosity, simplification, active repetition, exploration, and explanation. All work best when your mind is engaged, playful, and eager to explore. The world of knowledge becomes a playground, and in that playground there is nothing you cannot learn.